I knew the first morning in my new lakeside cabin would be memorable, but I didn't expect it to begin with a stranger pounding on my door like she was trying to knock it clean off the hinges. The sun had barely cleared the pines, the lake was still wrapped in soft mist, and I was standing there in my pajamas, coffee half made, wondering who the hell had the audacity to ruin the quiet I had paid, very handsomely, for. The pounding came again, louder this time. "Open up. I know you're in there," a shrill voice screeched. Great. I'd barely moved in, and already I was getting a first-hand experience of local wildlife. And judging by the voice alone, this wasn't the friendly kind of wildlife that brought you homemade pie and a welcome brochure. I unlatched the door. On my porch stood a woman dressed in an aggressively pink tracksuit, a little poodle tucked under her arm like a football, and a glare that could curdle fresh milk. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet-like mound that made me wonder if a stiff breeze might kill someone. "You're the one who bought the Simmons cabin," she snapped, not even waiting for a greeting. "That's me," I said slowly. "Can I help?" "You bought the lake." I blinked. "I bought the property the cabin sits on, including shoreline access. Yes." "No," she huffed, stabbing a finger inches from my face. "The lake. The entire lake. My lake. The lake my family has used for generations." Her poodle yapped in agreement. I had been warned, vaguely, by the real estate agent that the neighbors can be particular. But I'd assumed that meant they liked their privacy or didn't appreciate noisy weekenders. Not this. Not a pink tracksuit-wearing zealot claiming ancestral ownership of a body of water she very much did not own. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to sound diplomatic, though diplomacy isn't exactly my strong suit before caffeine. "But the parcel map clearly shows." "I don't care what your fancy little map says," she snapped. "You listen here, city boy. My name is Karen Ferguson, and I manage the Lake Community Association." Ah, there it was. Karen, the stereotype in living, screaming color. "And?" I asked. "And," she continued, puffing up with the self-importance of a tyrant in a small kingdom, "the lake is common property. You might own the cabin, but you have no rights to the shoreline. We've been using this lake for years. My children learn to swim here. My grandchildren feed the ducks here. And I am not about to let some outsider ruin our traditions." I felt a slow grin form despite myself. Out of all the things I expected to deal with when I decided to move here, repairing an old dock, bears rummaging through garbage bins, maybe the occasional power outage, being told I didn't own the shoreline I had paid a fortune for was not on the list. I read the deed very thoroughly. I said, "I own this section of land and the 50 feet of shoreline that come with it. That includes the dock. That includes water access. And that includes not having strangers stroll onto my property whenever they please." Karen scoffed like I'd told her the sky was green. "Well, we'll see about that." She spun on her heel and marched toward the lake, her dog bouncing with each stump. I watched as she strutted to the edge of my shoreline, pointed at the water like she was cursing it, then glanced back at me. "You hear me? This isn't over. That lake belongs to the community, and no amount of paperwork will change that." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Paperwork tends to matter, especially to law enforcement. Her face twisted. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I absolutely would." She stormed back up the path, muttering to herself about outsiders ruining everything and idiots with money, before vanishing into the tree line. When the woods finally swallowed her neon tracksuit, I let out the breath I'd been holding and took in the lake again. My lake. I bought this place for peace, for a fresh start, for silence so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. But now? Now I could feel something else stirring. Not fear, not annoyance. Something darker. Because the truth was, Karen hadn't chosen the wrong man to pick a fight with. She had chosen the worst man. See, I didn't move here just for sunsets and fresh air. I moved here because I needed control. Something life had taken from me again and again in ways that left scars deeper than I'd admit. I learned a long time ago that when someone tries to take something from me, I don't just hold the line. I push back. Hard. And as I stepped onto my deck, feeling the new wooden boards creak beneath my feet, a thought settled in my mind like a stone dropping into deep water. This woman really believed she could intimidate me. She really thought she could claim something I bought fair and square. She thought she could get away with it because she had gotten away with everything else her entire life. But not this time. The lake was mine. Legally, financially, logically, and now emotionally, which meant I would defend it. Not with shouting, not with threats, not even with the law, at least not at first. No, I would defend what was mine in a way that ensured Karen Ferguson would never forget the day she decided to declare war on the wrong neighbor. I walked down to the water's edge, letting the cold ripples brush my toes as the morning mist thinned. It was beautiful, quiet, untouched, full of a serenity I intended to protect. But as I stood there, another thought hit me like a spark to dry timber. Why was Karen so obsessed with this lake? What history, or secret, had twisted her into a rabid guardian of something she didn't even own? The question lingered in the stillness like a challenge, and I already knew the answer wouldn't just explain her behavior. It would ignite the revenge story that was about to unfold. Because nobody fights that hard for nothing. And whatever Karen was hiding, I was about to drag it into the light. By the next morning, I was convinced Karen had spent the night plotting. Maybe she had a whiteboard filled with scribbles and arrows. Maybe she'd formed a neighborhood militia. Maybe she'd sacrificed a scented candle in some suburban ritual meant to protect the lake. Whatever she'd done, she was up earlier than me, and that alone felt like a violation of nature. I stepped out onto the deck with my coffee, hoping for a quiet start, but instead found 3 new objects littering my shoreline. A bright orange traffic cone, a laminated sign zip-tied to a wooden stake, a lawn chair that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. The sign read, Community Lake, private docks inlet without approval of the LCA. Trespassing will be reported. Reported to whom? The HOA guards? The Lake Community Association police? I couldn't help but laugh. It was a short, sharp sound, somewhere between disbelief and delight. Because Karen, in her pin-drop pink tracksuit and intense entitlement, had made the first move. Good. I'd been waiting. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness anchor me. I don't rush into retaliation. I observe. I plan. That tendency has cost me relationships in the past. Apparently strategic patience isn't what some people want in an argument. But here, on this lake, it would serve me well. Still, I needed information. I needed to know what kind of association Karen actually ran, how much influence she really had, and just how far she believed her authority stretched. So I walked down to her house. It shouldn't have been hard to find. I assumed she lived in the biggest, most aggressively landscaped house on the block, and I was right. The Ferguson home towered over the shoreline like a wealthy tyrant disgusted by its subjects. Hydrangeas everywhere, a bird bath shaped like an angel, 3 lawn gnomes that looked suspiciously angry. Karen was out front, clipping bushes with the energy of someone who'd been awake since 4 a.m. "Oh, it's you," she said without turning. "Come to apologize. For owning my property. For disrespecting our community rules." I shoved my hands in my pockets. I didn't see any rules in my welcome packet. "There's no welcome packet," she snapped. "I rest my case." Karen finally spun toward me, clippers in one hand, poodle in the other, making me wonder how many limbs this woman actually had access to at any given moment. "You need to take down that dock," she declared. "It is unauthorized. It came with the property, and it is unauthorized, and it wasn't built by me." "Well," she sniffed, "now that you're here, it needs approval." "From who?" "Me." That explained everything. Karen didn't run a community association. She was a community association. Self-appointed, unchecked, drunk on power like it was rosé at a summer brunch. "And if I don't?" I asked. Her smile stretched too far. "We escalate." I stared at her, wondering just how far she would escalate if left unchecked. Would she come onto my property? Would she destroy the dock? Would she rally the other neighbors to turn me into the lakeside pariah? Some men might have tried to win her over with charm or compromise. Some men might have walked away and hoped she'd get bored. Some men might have ignored her altogether. I'm not some man. "Karen," I said slowly, "I bought my land. I own that shoreline, and I won't be bullied." Her eye twitched. "We'll see." I turned and walked away, not because I didn't want to stay and argue, but because I'd gotten all the information I needed. Karen wasn't trying to preserve community tradition. She wasn't trying to maintain order. She wanted control, complete control, and she'd been allowed to have it for a very long time. Well, not anymore. The first strike, as it turned out, would come from me, but in a way Karen would never expect. I spent the rest of the morning at the county records office. The clerk looked at me like she couldn't decide whether I was lost or lonely, but once I explained what I needed, she softened. Property maps, easement records, historical claims, old meeting notes from the long-defunct original Lake Association, which, unsurprisingly, had been abandoned over 20 years ago. Karen's so-called community association was nothing but a social group, not recognized, not registered, not legal in any capacity. I left the office with a binder full of copies, more than enough ammunition, but I wasn't going to use it yet. Revenge isn't about speed. It's about accuracy. And I suspected that if I waited just a little longer, Karen would push things further. She didn't disappoint. When I returned home, I found her and 2 other neighbors standing at the edge of my property, pointing, measuring, and whispering like they were planning a military incursion. The 2 men with her looked exhausted, like they'd been strong-armed into participating. Karen noticed me and raised her voice immediately. "We're conducting an evaluation. Your dock violates community aesthetic standards." I looked at the men. One mouthed, "Sorry, I wasn't aware there were written standards," I said. "There aren't," Karen admitted, "but I know them." Of course she did. What exactly is wrong with my dock? It's too long. It's 12 feet. It's too brown. It's wood. It looks new. It stands out. So, the problem is that it's nice. Karen bristled. It disrupts harmony. Ah, harmony. HOA code for I don't like it. I let out a thoughtful hum. Well then, maybe you should file a complaint. I am filing one. With whom? With the association. You're the association. Exactly, she said proudly. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Because she had no idea I had already pulled every legal document that proved her authority was as real as her acrylic nails. I stepped closer. Karen, this is your final warning. Stay off my property, and stay away from my dock. Her voice dipped into a hiss. Or what? Or you'll find out exactly how real ownership works. She smirked, convinced she'd won. You're new here. You don't know how things work. No, I said. I know exactly how things work. You're just not used to someone calling you a bluff. Her smirk faded. Consider the bluff called, I added, then walked up the deck steps without looking back. But once inside, watching through the window, I saw her expression contort. Fury, confusion, and something else, a flicker of worry she couldn't hide. Good, because tomorrow, Karen would learn she had started a war she couldn't win, and I would make my move, but not with paperwork, not with lawyers, not with the county, not yet. No, my first move would be psychological, something subtle, something that would shake her confidence, something that would make her wonder whether the lake she claimed to own was slipping out of her grasp, because revenge is sweetest when it starts slow. And what I had planned for Karen would make her regret every single step she'd taken onto my shoreline. By sunrise the next day, I had already launched my counterstrike, quietly, strategically, and without stepping a single toe outside the law. Karen wanted a war. I'd give her one. But mine wouldn't be fought with screaming matches on porches or makeshift community rules scribbled in Sharpie. No, my fight would be subtle, psychological, precise, and it would begin with a simple sign. I hammered it into the grass right at the edge of my shoreline, angled purposely so Karen could see it from her kitchen window. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Not dramatic, not confrontational, just factual, and worse, for her, undeniably legal. From inside her house came a shriek so loud it startled a flock of geese off the water. Perfect. I retreated inside to sip my coffee and watch. Nothing good ever comes from reacting too quickly. The best revenge is measured, patient, and unavoidable. And Karen was the type who expected her bullying to be met with fear or silence. She had no idea what to do when someone pushed back. The knock at my door came exactly 5 minutes later. Rapid, frantic, and unmistakably Karen. I opened the door. She didn't wait to be invited in. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, storming onto my porch like she owned it. "Good morning to you, too." "Don't play cute," she snapped. "You can't put that sign there." "I can put it anywhere on my property." "This isn't your property," she practically shouted. "The shoreline is communal." I almost felt bad. Almost. "Karen," I said slowly, "I checked county records. Your community association has no legal standing. This is my shoreline, my land. The sign stays." Her face went pale in the way people go pale when their entire worldview is starting to crumble. I don't care what papers you dug up," she stammered. "This is how things have always been." "That doesn't mean it was ever legal." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The poodle in her arms barked at me as if trying to save her dignity. "Don't think you can intimidate me with paperwork," she managed, though her voice wobbled. "I'm not scared of you." "You seem scared." Her eyes flashed. "This community listens to me. If you think anyone will back you." "That's the thing," I said calmly. "I don't need them to." Karen let out a strangled sound somewhere between a growl and a gasp. "You'll regret this. I promise you." And then she left, stormed off, shoulders tight, muttering under her breath. But her retreat wasn't victory. Not yet. Retaliation like haze doesn't stop. It escalates. And I was counting on it. The next ripple came an hour later. I was reinforcing the steps on my dock when I heard voices. 2 men, low and tense, standing just out of view beyond the trees. "She's out of control," one said. "This is going too far." "It's Karen, the other side. What did you expect? Man buys a cabin, and she acts like he stole the Declaration of Independence. She'll drag the whole neighborhood into a fight. And I don't want to be caught in the middle." I stayed quiet, turning my hammer softly in my palm. The neighbors weren't Karen's eager followers. They were reluctant soldiers. I needed that information. Allies weren't necessary, but they made things easier. The voices drifted away, replaced by the low hum of a car engine approaching from the road. Karen was back, and she hadn't come alone. A black SUV parked in front of her house. Out stepped a man in a crisp polo, wearing sunglasses and the kind of confidence only bureaucratic authority gives someone. He held a clipboard. Karen had brought reinforcements. He marched toward me, clearing his throat. "Sir, are you the owner of this property?" "Yes." "I'm from the LCA compliance office," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "The what?" He hesitated. "The Lake Community Association." I nearly laughed. Karen had created a fake title for this man. "And what's your name?" I asked. He stiffened. "Mark." "Last name?" "A beat. Just Mark." "Just Mark. Perfect. And your office?" He gestured vaguely behind him. "Karen's house." I stared. "So Karen hired you?" "I'm contracted by the association," he said defensively, flipping through his clipboard as if it contained legitimacy. I stepped closer. "Let me guess. She told you I'm violating community rules." "Yes," he said. "Your dock does not meet code." "What code?" He flipped a page. Then another. Then another. Finally, he cleared his throat. "We," still finalizing it. I almost admired the attempt. Almost. "Mark," I said gently, "do you have any legal authority to be here?" His shoulders sagged. "No." I smiled. "Then I suggest you go home before Karen drags you into something messy." He looked relieved, almost grateful, and hurried off without further argument. Karen stormed after him, berating him the entire way. Watching him flee was the most entertainment I'd had in weeks. But more importantly, Karen was unraveling, losing control, losing her composure, which meant the timing was perfect for my next move. That evening, I put a folding chair out on my dock and sat with a journal. Not to write deep thoughts or poetry. No, this was bait. Karen couldn't resist snooping, and she didn't disappoint. I heard her before I saw her, twigs snapping, bushes rustling. The kind of stealth only people who have never been sneaky attempt. She crept toward the shoreline, squinting through shadows, clearly trying to read whatever was in my lap. I closed the journal slowly and turned. "Evening, Karen." She froze mid-step, one foot raised like a startled deer. I was just walking. On my property. She swallowed. I didn't cross the line. "You're 2 steps over it." Her eyes darted to the ground as if hoping a property line would magically appear beneath her feet. Karen stepped back, sputtering. "I was making sure you weren't doing anything illegal." "Minding my own business is only illegal in your imagination." She glared, but there was fear now. Real fear. Good. That mattered. Fear made people sloppy. "Your signs," she said, voice trembling slightly. "Your paperwork. You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Then stop trespassing," I said, "and stop pretending your imaginary association has authority." Her lips quivered, but she turned and retreated again, faster this time. And as night settled over the lake, still and dark and shimmering with moonlight, I sat on my dock and let the quiet soak in. Karen was off balance. Her certainty was cracked, her grip on the neighborhood slipping. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. She hadn't felt consequences, real consequences, the kind that make someone realize they picked a fight they cannot win. And tomorrow she would, because tomorrow I wasn't just going to defend my property. I was going to take something back, something she'd been guarding desperately for years. Something hidden, something secret, something she never wanted anyone to discover. Something I was now very, very close to uncovering. The next morning arrived with an uncanny stillness. No geese, no breeze, no Karen shrieking at squirrels for existing. The lake sat like a sheet of dark glass, undisturbed and quiet in a way that made the hairs on my arms rise. When a person like Karen goes silent, it's never because they've given up. It's because they are planning something worse. But I was planning to. Today was a day I'd finally investigate the one unanswered question gnawing at me. Why was Karen so obsessed with the lake? Why had she latched onto ownership like it was oxygen? Why did her anger smell less like entitlement and more like fear? And yesterday, while she was busy screaming at just Mark, I'd found the first hint. A scattering of old, cracked board half-buried underbrush at the far end of her property. At first glance, they looked like part of an abandoned dock, but the planks were too old, too thick, and reinforced with rusted iron. They weren't part of a dock. They were part of a platform, one that had been deliberately torn apart. But by whom and why? I was going to find out. I packed a small bag, flashlight, gloves, notebook, and my phone, and followed the tree line around the lake, staying quiet, staying out of sight. I wasn't trespassing. All this land was accessible from the lake bed itself, and according to county maps, the area behind Karen's house had a small public access strip, the one thing she didn't seem to know existed. I reached the spot where I'd first seen the old boards and pushed back branches, revealing more than before. Something had definitely been built here once. A boathouse, maybe, or a dockhouse, possibly even a platform for fishing tournaments. But everyone I'd spoken to mentioned nothing about previous structures, and the metal pieces scattered through the mud weren't normal dock supports. These were industrial, thick bolts, reinforced plates, and fragments of fencing. I knelt, brushing away dirt from a flat piece of metal. There were letters carved into it, initials, FF. My heart kicked a little. Ferguson, her last name. Was this a family's? Before I could dig deeper, a twig snapped behind me. I turned sharply. Karen stood 10 feet away, breathing heavily, her hair frizzed by humidity and rage. She wasn't wearing her usual pink tracksuit. Instead, she wore dark clothes meant to blend in. She had followed me. "What?" she spat. "Do you think you're doing on my land?" "This is public access shoreline," I said calmly. "County maps say so. Want me to pull them up?" She took a shaky step forward. "You're digging through my family's property." "I'm not digging. I'm observing." "Don't get smart with me," she hissed. "Move away from that." "Why?" I asked. "What is this place?" Her jaw clenched. It's nothing. Old family dock. No. A storage structure. No. A platform. No. Then what is it? She trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. Something buried beneath anger. Leave it alone. Her voice cracked on the word leave. That crack told me everything. I stood slowly. Karen, what happened here? She shook her head fast, like a child refusing vegetables. Nothing. It was torn down years ago. Not important. Not your concern. Your initials are on it. Her breath hitched. FF, I said softly. Ferguson family. Ferguson. Stop. Her voice shattered through the trees. But behind that fury was something new. Something raw. Fear. Real fear. What are you hiding? I asked. Because I gestured to the metal plates, isn't something a normal homeowner rips down quietly. It wasn't quiet, she said in a strangled whisper. I froze. She looked down at the mud, shoulders sagging like years of weight were finally starting to show. It wasn't quiet, she repeated. Everyone heard. Everyone saw. But no one talks about it anymore. Something cold slid through my spine. What happened? Karen looked up, and for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look like a tyrant. She looked like someone cornered by her own past. My brother, she said. It was an accident. Her voice faltered. He drowned, she whispered. Right here, on this platform. 26 years ago. The wind shifted, rippling the lake like it was exhaling. I let the silence stretch a moment. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I didn't know. Of course I didn't know. No one had told me. No one mentioned anything about a death. Because Karen made sure they didn't. She stared at the ground, breathing unevenly. It was supposed to be demolished after. Mom wanted it gone. Dad couldn't bear to look at it. And the town helped tear it down. She swallowed, but I didn't want to lose it. It was his. She pointed at the metal plate with trembling fingers. Those initials, they are not my family's. They are his. Suddenly, the picture changed. The aggression, the obsession, the need for control. Karen wasn't guarding the lake. She was guarding her trauma. The lake wasn't territory to her. It was a memorial. Her brother had died here, and she'd built her entire personality around protecting the one thing she couldn't save. I softened, but only slightly. I didn't come here to disrespect what happened, I said. But you can't take it out on me. Or anyone else. She blinked quickly, like she was trying to shove the grief back down. If I don't control what happens here, she whispered, it feels like I'm letting him die again. For the first time, I saw her humanity, not the monstrous HOA caricature she projected. But sympathy has limits, especially after everything she'd done. I'm sorry for your brother, I said gently, truly, but that doesn't give you ownership of the lake. Her eyes hardened again, fear retreating back into fury. You don't understand. You can't understand. No, I said, but you can choose whether to keep fighting me or stop before things get worse. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a shaking whisper. I can't lose this lake. I won't. Her gaze flicked to my dock, then to the sign, then back to me. An idea sparked behind her eyes, dark, dangerous, and unmistakable. I felt my stomach tighten. She wasn't going to stop. She wasn't capable of stopping. What did you do, Karen? I asked. Her lips twitched into a grim smile. Nothing yet. With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. And I knew, deep down, that she was planning something big. Something reckless. Something destructive. Something I'd have to stop before she destroyed more than just property. Because a person fueled by grief is unpredictable. A person fueled by grief and power, they are unstoppable until someone pushes back harder. And I was about to, because Karen had just crossed a line between nuisance and threat. And tomorrow, the real war would begin. After my encounter with Karen by the old platform, I realized something critical. She wasn't just aggressive. She was obsessive. And obsession has a predictable rhythm if you know how to watch it closely. Karen Ferguson had her patterns, and once you identified them, you could manipulate them. That was exactly what I intended to do. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Not in a flashy, overt way. No signs. No confrontations. I set subtle traps. Psychological traps. First, I documented everything. Every previous interaction. Every note she'd left. Every lurid shout. Every threatening gesture. Every inch she dared to claim as community property. Photographs, videos, timestamps, and logs. If this escalated legally, I would have her entire history compiled neatly, ready to dismantle any argument she tried to make. Second, I began reinforcing my dock. Nothing extravagant, just solid screws, new planks, a sturdier railing, but enough that anyone trying to tamper with it would have trouble. Karen had already implied she might physically intervene. I wasn't taking chances. Third, I prepared bait. I knew Karen's weakness, the secret platform. The buried grief tied to her brother's death. The thing she couldn't face but also couldn't let go of. And now, it would become the key to drawing her out, to controlling her moves. I placed small, inconspicuous markers near the site of the old platform, a rusted metal bolt, a fragment of the old boards, a corner of the platform partially visible above the mud. They were nothing substantial, but to Karen, they would be irresistible. Then I waited. It didn't take long. By late afternoon, I saw movement in the shadows across the water. Karen emerged from the tree line, carefully crouched, her eyes scanning, her breathing shallow. She had spotted my markers immediately. The way her gaze lingered on the fragments told me all I needed to know. She was compelled. She had to approach. I stayed on my dock, partially hidden behind the small chair I'd set up yesterday, pretending to read a book. She didn't see me. She never saw me. She just saw the pieces of her past calling to her. And that was the point. Step by step, she moved toward the fragments, muttering under her breath. Not again, not again. I won't let it happen again. Her fear and anger collided in a chaotic storm. The same woman who had stormed onto my porch like a hurricane was now timid, cautious, almost haunted. And she was perfectly vulnerable. I didn't need to rush. I let her fumble, kneel, and dig gently through the mud and debris. Every time she unearthed a fragment of the old structure, I recorded it. I captured her reactions, her muttered words, and the slow transformation of her composure from confident aggressor to haunted defender of lost history. Her obsession was now my weapon. That evening, the lake reflected a perfect mirror of the twilight sky, and I realized this was more than strategy. It was theater. Karen was the unwitting actor, playing out scenes from her grief-driven script. And I was the director, carefully guiding the narrative toward the moment she would be forced to confront reality. She didn't notice me approach from the side, staying just out of her peripheral vision. "Karen," I called gently, letting the sound float across the water. She froze. "I see you found something interesting," I continued, keeping my voice calm, almost soothing. "Something important to you." Her hands clenched, holding a fragment of rusted metal. You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I'm not here to harm it," I said. "I'm here to help you understand it." Her eyes flicked toward me, suspicion flickering, then caution, then recognition. She remembered who I was. She remembered the dock, the signs, the papers, the legal authority. She remembered every humiliation, every challenge. And yet, she needed me to validate what she had unearthed. She faltered, then stopped. "Come on," I said softly, stepping closer. "Let's piece this together. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Her gaze lingered on the fragment, her trembling hands betraying her internal struggle. Then, slowly, she set it down. I knelt beside her, carefully lifting another piece from the mud. "Look at this," I said. "This isn't just debris. It's history. But history doesn't give anyone ownership over this lake. It doesn't give anyone the right to control what belongs to others. Understand." She swallowed hard, and I could see the storm inside her beginning to break. Her hands shook, her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, the powerful, aggressive persona melted away entirely. But there was still resistance. Fear doesn't vanish with logic. I just wanted to protect it," she admitted, voice cracking. "I couldn't lose it again." And you won't, I said, keeping my tone steady. Not like this, but obsessing over it, trying to push me away, threatening people. That doesn't protect anything. It only isolates you. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't move closer. I didn't offer comfort. Comfort would give her leverage to manipulate me later. I simply let her face the truth she had been avoiding for decades. Finally, she whispered, almost inaudibly, I don't know what to do. Then start here, I said. Step back. Let go of the need to control. You can honor the past without hurting everyone else in the present. That lake, my dock, my property, they are not the enemy. Your obsession is. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Then she slowly nodded. Not surrender, not admission of defeat, but a recognition that she had been misled by grief and anger, letting them dictate her actions. And that, I realized, was a true turning point. I stood and stepped away, giving her space. She remained kneeling, looking at the fragments of her brother's platform, breathing unevenly, processing. The lake remained quiet, reflecting the last light of day. The battle lines hadn't disappeared. They were still there, but now Karen's control over her rage had weakened. And tomorrow, when she approached again, she would hesitate. Fear of losing control, fear of confronting the truth, fear of what she might do next. It all worked in my favor. The trap was set. She wouldn't attack the dock outright. She wouldn't try to intimidate me directly. Not yet, but she would come. And when she did, she would be vulnerable, fragile, and driven by the very obsession that had fueled her aggression for years. I was ready, because this time, Karen Ferguson would learn the difference between owning a memory and owning a lake. And by the time she realized it, it would be too late. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. And the ripples from my first moves had begun to spread. Quiet, inevitable, unstoppable. The lake was mine to defend. And now, I was ready to strike back in a way Karen would never see coming. The next morning arrived with a quiet so complete it felt unnatural. The lake was usually alive at dawn, loons calling, wind brushing against the reeds, water lapping at the shore. But not today. Today the water lay flat and unmoving, like a sheet of polished stone. Even the trees held their breath. That kind of stillness never means peace. It means anticipation. I stepped onto my dock with a mug of coffee, watching the mist rise in thin, ghost-like ribbons. Somewhere behind that fog, beyond the curve of the shoreline, I knew Karen was awake. I could feel the tension, like two storms sensing each other across a vast plain. The trap was set. Now the waiting began. I didn't have to wait long. By mid-morning, a faint crunch of gravel carried across the lake. Her footsteps, too quick, too sharp to be casual. I didn't turn my head. I'd learned that ignoring her presence only amplified her urgency, her need to break the silence with some dramatic intrusion. Sure enough, her voice came cutting through the fog. We need to talk. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look up from the dock plank I was sanding. Then talk, I said. She hesitated at the edge of my property, a place she used to trespass boldly without a second thought. Now she lingered there, unsure. That hesitation told me everything. The psychological shift had begun. She wasn't approaching me as an aggressor anymore. She was approaching as someone afraid of triggering something inside herself. Finally, she stepped forward. What you showed me yesterday, she began, then stopped as if the words were too heavy. It wasn't fair. I looked up at her. You mean the truth? She frowned, shaking her head. No, the way you did it. You made me feel like I was losing my mind. You made yourself feel that way, I replied. I only held up the mirror. Her jaw clenched. She hated that answer, but it was true. She moved closer, steps cautious, as though the dock itself might react. Listen, she said, I don't want trouble. I just want you to stop provoking things. I set down the sander. I provoked nothing, I said quietly. You attacked me first. You attacked my property. You tried to bully me into compliance. And when that didn't work, you spiraled. Her face twisted. Anger? Grief? Shame? I couldn't tell. She exhaled sharply. I didn't spiral. Karen, I said calmly. You dug through mud until sunset looking for scraps of a platform from 30 years ago. Her eyes flicked upward in surprise. She hadn't realized I'd watched. She hadn't realized I'd recorded it. She hadn't realized how exposed she had been. Why? She demanded. Why were you watching me? Because, I said, I needed to understand your motives. And now I do. She stepped back, arms crossing protectively over her chest. And what do you think my motives are? Compulsion, I said, loss, and fear. Something broke in her expression, not dramatically, not with tears, but with a subtle collapse. Her shoulders dipped. Her posture softened. The fire in her eyes dimmed. She wasn't fighting me now. She was fighting herself. Good. That was the point. I'm not your enemy, I said, my voice steady, but I will defend my rights. And if you continue to threaten me or my property, I will escalate it legally. I have everything I need. Her breathing quickened. She understood what everything I need meant. Documentation, video evidence, audio, patterns of behavior, witnesses, her reputation, her life here, all vulnerable to collapse. The lake remained silent, watching. Finally, she spoke again, this time softer. What do you want from me? Respect, I said simply. Boundaries. And distance. She blinked, processing that. And I added, I want you to acknowledge that your brother's death, though tragic, does not give you dominion over everyone who moves near the shoreline. Her lips parted in shock. She wasn't expecting that. She wasn't ready for me to name the wound she kept hidden beneath all the bluster. I don't want to talk about that. You already are, I said. Every time you lash out at someone for being near the water, that's what you're talking about. Every time you claim you're defending something, that's what you're defending. You turn grief into a rule book. She shook her head, but weakly. Stop. So I will, I said, if you stop projecting that pain onto me. Silence. Deep, raw silence. For the first time, Karen didn't have a retort. She looked small, smaller than I had ever seen her, like someone standing on the edge of remembering something they'd buried too deeply. She finally asked, in a whisper, what happens now? I took a slow breath. That depends on you, I said. If you leave my property alone, if you respect the boundaries, then nothing more happens. We move forward, quietly, separately. And if I don't, then, I said, everything you're afraid of losing will be exposed. Publicly, legally, permanently. The threat wasn't violent. It was truthful. And truth, for Karen Ferguson, was far scarier than any confrontation. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the lake as though searching for answers under the still surface. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Not storming, not raging, just leaving. And as she disappeared into the tree line, the wind finally returned, rippling across the lake, breaking the eerie stillness. The water was alive again, but the quiet war beneath its surface was far from over. Karen was retreating, not surrendering, retreating. And people like her don't retreat unless they are planning their next move. I took another sip of my coffee. Let her plan. Let her stew. Let her unravel. Because the next phase was already in motion. And when the water turned still again, the real game would begin.